The wedding was a fairy tale, spun from gold and diamonds, a storybook romance culminating at the altar. Evelyn Rowe, radiant and pregnant, believed she had found her forever with billionaire titan Nathaniel Blackwood. But fairy tales can burn. Before the ink on their marriage license was dry, she discovered her new husband in the arms of another woman in their own wedding suite. The mistress's victorious smirk was the last thing Evelyn saw before her world shattered. The next morning, Nathaniel Blackwood, the man who had just vowed his eternal love, was gone. Vanished without a trace, leaving behind a pregnant bride, a scornful family, and a mystery that would unravel a conspiracy far darker than a simple act of infidelity. The late August air over the sprawling Greenwich, Connecticut estate was thick with the scent of white roses and old money. Evelyn Rowe felt like she was floating a dream given form in ivory silk and chantilly lace. The dress, a custom creation by a designer whose name was spoken in hushed, reverent tones, clung to her body, delicately accentuating the gentle swell of her stomach, a secret promise she and Nathaniel shared. At 4 months pregnant, she was filled with a profound, almost dizzying joy. From her vantage point on the marble terrace of Blackwood Manor, she watched the last of the sunlight bleed across the sky, painting the manicured lawns in hues of orange and violet. Guests. A constellation of the East Coast's most powerful figures mingled below their laughter like the clinking of fine crystal. This was Nathaniel's world, a world of dynastic wealth, of whispered stock tips and political favors exchanged over champagne. It was a world she was now a part of. It's breathtaking, isn't it? Evelyn turned, a smile blooming on her face. Nathaniel Blackwood stood behind her, impossibly handsome in his bespoke tuxedo. His dark hair was impeccably styled, and his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held an intensity that still made her heart skip. He slid his arms around her waist, his large, warm hands coming to rest protectively over their unborn child. "It's perfect," she whispered, leaning back against his chest. "You're perfect." "We are," he corrected gently, his lips brushing her temple. "Everything I do, Evelyn, is for you, for this family." She believed him. How could she not? Nathaniel had pursued her with a single-minded determination that had swept her off her feet. She was an art historian, content with her world of dusty archives and quiet galleries. He was the CEO of Blackwood Industries, a global conglomerate whose name was synonymous with power. They were an unlikely pair, and she knew many, including Nathaniel's own mother, saw her as little more than a gold-digging interloper. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Genevieve Blackwood, the family's formidable matriarch, was watching them from across the terrace. Her expression was as unreadable and cold as the diamond choker at her throat. Genevieve had made her disapproval of Evelyn plain from the start, her polite inquiries always feeling like interrogations, her compliments laced with subtle barbs. She saw Evelyn not as a daughter-in-law, but as a weakness in the fortress of the Blackwood dynasty. Nathaniel seemed to sense her unease. "Ignore her," he murmured into her ear. "Tonight is about us. Nothing and no one else matters." He led her to the dance floor for their first dance. As the orchestra swelled into a hauntingly beautiful melody, the world melted away. It was just the two of them swaying in the center of their own universe. He looked down at her, his gaze so full of adoration that it chased away the last of her doubts. This was real. This love was real. The reception was a blur of well wishes, toasts, and endless smiles until her cheeks ached. Her best friend, Jenna Hayes, A fiery redhead with a no-nonsense attitude squeezed her hand. "You look stunning, Ev. But seriously, that old dragon Genevieve has been staring daggers at you all night. If she tries anything, I've got a glass of Cabernet with her name on it." Evelyn laughed, a genuine happy sound. "It's fine. She'll come around." "If she doesn't, we'll short sell her favorite charity," Jenna quipped, making Evelyn laugh again. As the night wore on, a sense of fatigue began to settle deep into her bones. The baby was making its presence known. Excusing herself, she decided to head up to their bridal suite to rest for a few minutes before the final send-off. She wanted to slip into the comfortable silk robe waiting for her and kick off the beautiful but punishing heels. The grand staircase of the manor was quiet, the sounds of the party below muffled by thick oak doors. She walked down the long carpeted hallway, her heart light. The suite was at the end of the west wing, a private sanctuary Nathaniel had personally overseen the decoration of. She pushed open the heavy door, a soft smile on her lips, ready to call down to her new husband. "Nathaniel, I just need a—" The words died in her throat. The room was dimly lit, save for the moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. But it was enough. It was more than enough to see the scene laid out before her. A woman with platinum blonde hair, her back to the door, was pressed against the wall. Nathaniel stood before her, his hands tangled in her hair, his tuxedo jacket discarded on the floor. Their mouths were locked in a feverish, desperate kiss that spoke of a deep and searing familiarity. It was not a stranger's kiss. It was not a mistake. For a moment, Evelyn's brain refused to process what her eyes were seeing. It was a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But then the woman pulled back slightly, turning her head. Evelyn's blood ran cold. It was Victoria Vance, the ambitious, notoriously ruthless COO of a rival tech firm, Vanguard Corp. Evelyn had met her once at a charity gala. She remembered Victoria's predatory smile and the way her eyes had lingered on Nathaniel a moment too long. The sound that escaped Evelyn's lips was a small, wounded thing, barely a gasp. But it was enough. Nathaniel's head whipped around. His eyes widened in horror, the color draining from his face. He looked like a man who had been struck by lightning. He shoved Victoria away from him so forcefully she stumbled. "Evelyn," he breathed, his voice raw. It's not what it looks like." The cliché was so absurd, so insulting, that it broke through her shock, replaced by a wave of white-hot fury. Victoria Vance, however, simply smoothed down her shimmering silver dress. She turned fully, and unlike the panic on Nathaniel's face, hers was a mask of cool, triumphant amusement. A slow, venomous smirk spread across her perfectly painted red lips. She looked Evelyn up and down, her gaze lingering for a heart-stopping second on Evelyn's barely there baby bump. "Well," Victoria purred, her voice dripping with condescension. "The blushing bride. It seems the party's over." The smirk. That was the thing that shattered Evelyn's world into a million irreparable pieces. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a victory lap. Evelyn looked from Victoria's gloating face to her husband's, the face of the man who just hours ago had promised to cherish and protect her for all of his days. The man who was the father of her child. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. A chilling, terrifying calm washed over her. She took one last look at the scene, the man she loved, the woman who had ruined her the opulent room that was meant to be their haven, now a gilded cage of lies, and she turned and walked away, the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears like a death knell. Evelyn didn't remember walking back down the hallway. Her feet moved on their own, carrying her away from the wreckage of her life. She found an unused sitting room, the air cold and stale, and sank into a velvet armchair, her body trembling uncontrollably. The silk of her wedding dress felt like a shroud. Each joyful memory from the day was now tainted, replaying in her mind as a cruel joke. Nathaniel's loving words, his tender kisses, the vows they had exchanged before God, and 300 witnesses, all of it was a lie. She sat there for what could have been minutes or an hour, wrapped in a cocoon of silent agony. The distant music of the party was a form of torture. Finally, the door creaked open. It was Jenna, her face etched with concern. "Ev, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." The dam broke. Evelyn's story came out in a torrent of choked sobs and fractured sentences. "Nathaniel, with Victoria Vance, in our room, She couldn't finish. She didn't have to. Jenna's face transformed from concern to pure, unadulterated rage. "That son of a bitch! I'll kill him! Where is he?" She made to stand, but Evelyn grabbed her arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "No, I want to go home." Home. The word felt foreign. The apartment she'd kept, the one Nathaniel had wanted her to sell, was the only place she could think of. Not this cold, monstrous house. Jenna, ever the protector, swung into action. She navigated them out a side entrance, avoiding the lingering guests and the prying eyes of the staff. She drove Evelyn through the sleeping Connecticut suburbs back to the city, the silence in the car thick with unspoken pain. Evelyn spent the night curled on her own sofa, still in her wedding dress, refusing to take it off. To remove it would be to accept that it was over, and some part of her was still desperately clinging to the hope that this was all a terrible nightmare. The morning light felt like an assault. Her phone had been buzzing incessantly since she'd fled the manor. Dozens of missed calls and texts from Nathaniel. "Evelyn, please. We need to talk." "It was a mistake. Let me explain. I love you." Each message was a fresh stab to her heart. She ignored them all. Around 10 a.m., a sleek black town car pulled up outside her building. The person who emerged was not Nathaniel, but Victoria Vance. Dressed in a sharp, cream-colored pantsuit, she looked as if she'd just stepped out of a boardroom, not another man's bed. "Jenna, don't let her in," Evelyn said, her voice hoarse. But Jenna was already at the door, blocking the entrance. "Get the hell away from here, you home-wrecking parasite!" Victoria simply arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "I'm not here to talk to the help. I'm here to see Evelyn." Her eyes flickered past Jenna, landing on Evelyn. "Don't you want to know why your brand new husband spent his wedding night with me instead of his pregnant little bride?" The calculated cruelty of her words was breathtaking. Evelyn felt a surge of adrenaline. She stood up and walked to the door, her movements stiff. "What do you want, Victoria?" "I just wanted to deliver a message," Victoria said, her smirk back in place. "Nathaniel made his choice. This pathetic little fairy tale of yours is over. He'll be in touch through his lawyers about the arrangements." She glanced pointedly at Evelyn's stomach again. "Don't worry. The Blackwoods always pay to clean up their messes." Before Evelyn or Jenna could respond, Victoria turned on her heel and glided back to her car, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and poison in her wake. For the next few hours, Evelyn expected the call from Nathaniel's lawyer. She expected divorce papers. She expected the end. What she didn't expect was the call she received just after 3 p.m. It was from Genevieve Blackwood. "Evelyn," her mother-in-law's voice was clipped, devoid of any warmth. "Where is my son?" "I imagine he's with his mistress," Evelyn replied, the bitterness sharp on her tongue. There was a pause. "Don't be deliberately obtuse. He is not with Miss Vance. Her office confirmed she's been in meetings all day. His security detail hasn't seen him since last night. His phone is going straight to voicemail. He missed a 9 a.m. board meeting. Nathaniel has never in his entire life missed a board meeting. So I will ask you again, where is he? A cold dread began to seep into Evelyn's bones, pushing past the anger and heartache. I haven't spoken to him. I haven't seen him since last night. He was last seen on the estate grounds around 2 a.m., arguing with someone on his phone, Genevieve stated. His car is still in the garage. His wallet and passport are in the suite. He has vanished. The world tilted on its axis. Victoria's smug visit this morning. She had acted as if she had won, as if Nathaniel was with her. But he wasn't. By evening, the situation had escalated. The Greenwich police were involved, though they treated it with a gentle touch reserved for the obscenely wealthy. The official line was that a high-powered man, likely under immense stress from his wedding and a looming business merger, had simply taken off to clear his head. They were polite, but dismissive. He'll turn up in a few days in the Hamptons with a headache, Mrs. Blackwood, one of the detectives had said to her with a condescending pat on the arm. Evelyn was forced to return to the manor to give a statement. The house, which had been a symbol of her dreams just 24 hours earlier, now felt like a mausoleum. The scent of roses was cloying funereal. Genevieve treated her with icy suspicion, her eyes scanning Evelyn as if searching for clues to her son's disappearance. The implication was clear. The distraught, scorned new bride was the most likely suspect. You had a fight, Genevieve stated, her voice like chipping ice. What did you say to him? Did you threaten him? He was cheating on me, Genevieve, on our wedding night. Evelyn's voice cracked. I walked away. That was it. Victoria Vance was also questioned. She played the part of the concerned business associate, beautifully admitting that she and Nathaniel had a complicated history, but denying any knowledge of his whereabouts. She expressed her deepest sympathies for the poor, distraught bride. The police bought it hook, line, and sinker. Days turned into a week. The media got wind of the story, and it exploded. Billionaire groom vanishes after lavish wedding. Photos of her and Nathaniel smiling and in love were splashed across every news site, juxtaposed with grainy paparazzi shots of a stone-faced Victoria. The narrative they spun was a sordid tale of a love triangle gone wrong. Evelyn became the tragic, pregnant wife, Victoria the glamorous other woman, and Nathaniel was the man who had simply walked away from it all. But Evelyn knew with a certainty that settled deep in her soul that it wasn't true. Nathaniel wouldn't just leave. He was meticulous, a control freak. He wouldn't abandon his company, his family, his child, not without a word. The police closed the active investigation after 2 weeks, classifying him as a voluntary missing person. The world moved on, but Evelyn couldn't. She was left alone in the vast, silent manor, a prisoner in her gilded cage, with the ghost of her husband, the scorn of his family, and a baby growing inside her that might never know its father. The last image seared into her mind was Victoria's triumphant smirk, a smirk that said she knew more than she was telling. And Evelyn realized that if she was ever going to find out what happened to Nathaniel, she would have to do it herself. A month crawled by, each day longer and emptier than the last. The media frenzy subsided, replaced by the relentless humming silence of Blackwood Manor. Genevieve had insisted Evelyn remain at the estate, a decision that felt less like concern and more like house arrest. For the sake of appearances, she'd said, and for the security of my grandchild. The staff moved around her like specters, their polite greetings laced with pity and suspicion. Evelyn was the woman whose husband had abandoned her on their wedding night. She was a tragic figure, a scandal. Her pregnancy was more pronounced now, a constant physical reminder of the life she and Nathaniel had planned together. Some days the grief was a leaden weight pinning her to the bed. On other days, a slow burning anger propelled her forward. She refused to be the victim in this story. She refused to let her child be born into a world where their father was a coward who ran away. She knew in her heart there was more to the story. Nathaniel, for all his faults, was a creature of habit and control. His study, a sanctuary of mahogany and worn leather, had become Evelyn's focus. The police had given it a cursory search, but she knew they wouldn't have known what to look for. She, on the other hand, had spent countless hours in this room while he worked learning the rhythm of his life. The room was exactly as he'd left it. A stack of files on his desk, a Mont Blanc pen lying beside an open ledger. But something was off. A specific file 1 he had been working on obsessively for weeks before the wedding was missing. It was a thick, dark blue binder labeled Project Nightingale. She had asked him about it once, and he'd been uncharacteristically evasive, just saying it was a revolutionary energy project that would change the future of the company. Now, it was gone. She also noticed faint scratch marks near the base of the enormous built-in bookshelf, as if someone had tried to pry something open. She ran her fingers over the wood, feeling the small imperfections. It was a dead end for now, but she filed the detail away. Her relationship with Genevieve remained fraught with tension. The older woman kept her at a distance, her conversations limited to inquiries about Evelyn's health and the babies. Yet Evelyn occasionally saw cracks in her icy facade. She would find Genevieve standing in the doorway of the study late at night, a lost look on her face, or notice her staring at a photograph of Nathaniel with an expression of profound sorrow. Genevieve was grieving too, but her pride and suspicion were a fortress she refused to abandon. Jenna was her lifeline. She visited every other day, smuggling in real-world food to counteract the bland, health-conscious meals the Manor's chef prepared. "You need to get out of this place, Ev," Jenna said one afternoon, watching as Evelyn listlessly pushed a piece of steamed asparagus around her plate. "It's a 5-star prison. Let's get the police to reopen the case." "They won't," Evelyn said, her voice flat. "As far as they're concerned, a rich guy got cold feet and flew to a private island. They don't care. No body, no crime." "So what's your plan? Just wait here until little Blackwood Jr. arrives?" "No," Evelyn said, a new resolve hardening her voice. "I'm going to find my own answers. I can't trust the police, and I certainly can't trust the Blackwoods. I'm going to hire someone." Jenna's eyes lit up. "A private investigator, yes, like in the movies. Someone grizzled and cynical who drinks whiskey for breakfast." The man Evelyn found wasn't quite that dramatic, but he was close. His name was Arthur Harding. He was a former NYPD detective in his late 50s, with a rumpled suit, tired eyes that missed nothing, and a reputation for being relentless. He worked out of a small, cluttered office in Queens that smelled of stale coffee and paper. Evelyn, using a portion of the generous allowance Nathaniel had settled on her before the wedding, met him there. She felt a pang of guilt using his money to investigate him, but she pushed it aside. Harding listened to her story without interruption, his face impassive. He took notes in a small, spiral-bound notebook. She told him everything: the wedding, the betrayal with Victoria Vance, the vanishing, the missing Project Nightingale file, the scratch marks on the bookshelf. When she finished, he leaned back in his squeaky chair and studied her for a long moment. "Mrs. Blackwood," he began, his voice a low gravel. 99 times out of 100 a story like this ends one of two ways. One, your husband is sipping a mojito on a beach in Belize with the blonde. Two, he's at the bottom of the Hudson in a pair of cement shoes because of gambling debts. or a deal gone bad. The "I need to clear my head" story is usually a cover for one of the other two. "I know my husband," Evelyn insisted. "He wouldn't just run, and if he was in that kind of trouble, he would have told me. Something was wrong in the weeks leading up to the wedding. He was distracted, stressed enough to cheat on his pregnant bride on his wedding night." Harding asked his question blunt, but not unkind. Evelyn flinched. "I don't have an answer for that, but the way he looked when I saw them, it wasn't just guilt. It was fear. And Victoria, she wasn't just gloating, she was performing, as if she needed me to see it." Harding's pen stilled. He looked at her with a newfound interest. "Performing, what do you mean?" "It felt staged." Evelyn said, the idea taking shape even as she spoke it. Her smirk, her lines. It was all too perfect, too cruel. Like she was deliberately trying to push me away to sever any ties I had to Nathaniel in the most brutal way possible. Harding steepled his fingers, his gaze thoughtful. "You think the affair was a setup?" "I don't know what to think," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But I know he's gone, and she's the only one who seemed happy about it. Start with her, Victoria Vance. Dig into every corner of her life, her connection to Nathaniel, her company Vanguard Corp. Find out what she's hiding. This won't be cheap, Mrs. Blackwood. Digging into people like Vance and companies like Vanguard, that's kicking a hornet's nest." "I don't care about the cost," Evelyn said, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. "I need the truth." Harding nodded slowly. "All right, I'll take the case. I'll start with Vance. But you need to be careful. If there is something more going on here, this manor might not be the safest place for you." Evelyn left Harding's office feeling a flicker of something she hadn't felt in weeks' hope. She had an ally. The whispers in the walls of Blackwood Manor were no longer just echoes of her own grief and fear. They were clues. And for the first time since her world had fallen apart, she felt ready to start listening to them. She was no longer just the abandoned wife. She was a woman on a mission. 2 weeks after hiring Arthur Harding, Evelyn received a call on a burner phone he had provided her. "Meet me at the diner in Koskob, the one off the post road. Come alone." The clandestine nature of the meeting sent a shiver of nervous energy through her. She gave the manor's driver a vague story about meeting a friend for lunch and had him drop her a few blocks away from the location. The diner was a classic slice of Americana with red vinyl booths and the smell of frying bacon hanging in the air. Harding was in a corner booth, a half-empty cup of coffee in front of him. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. As soon as she sat down, he slid a manila folder across the table. "You were right," he said, his voice low. "Victoria Vance is more than just a corporate rival with a grudge." Evelyn opened the folder. Inside were pages of typed notes and several grainy surveillance photos. The first few detailed Victoria's background. She hadn't climbed the corporate ladder. She had blasted her way up it, leaving a trail of ruined careers and hostile takeovers in her wake. She was the right hand of Donovan Croft, the notoriously ruthless CEO of Vanguard Corp. Croft was a corporate shark of the highest order, a man who believed in winning at any cost. Vanguard and Blackwood Industries have been rivals for years, Harding explained. But in the last 6 months it got personal. They were both bidding on a massive government contract for renewable energy. The Project Nightingale you mentioned, it involves a new battery technology Nathaniel's R&D department developed. It's a game changer. Whoever gets that tech controls the energy market for the next 50 years. Evelyn's blood ran cold. This was what Nathaniel had been working on so obsessively. "It gets better," Harding continued, tapping a photograph. It showed Victoria Vance meeting a man in a parking garage. The man was burly with a shaved head and a grim expression. "This is a man named Gregor, ex-Special Forces, now a freelance corporate security consultant. That's a nice way of saying he makes problems disappear for people like Donovan Croft. He specializes in intimidation, blackmail, and abduction." Evelyn stared at the photo, her heart pounding. "My sources say that Blackwood Industries was the front-runner for the contract," Harding said. "Nathaniel had the superior tech and was about to close the deal. 2 days after he disappeared, Vanguard Corp suddenly submitted a revised proposal with technical data that was shockingly similar to Blackwood's. The contract is now on hold, pending an investigation into possible industrial espionage." The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture that was more terrifying than she could have imagined. "So you think Vanguard or Donovan Croft had Nathaniel abducted to steal his research?" "It's the working theory," Harding confirmed. "Which brings us back to the wedding night. Why the public drama with Victoria? Why not just snatch him quietly, to discredit him?" Evelyn whispered, the realization dawning on her. If he vanished after being caught in a sordid affair, everyone would assume he fled from shame. No one would suspect a corporate kidnapping. It creates a smokescreen. And Victoria, she was the instrument. "Exactly." Harding nodded, looking at her with a new respect. "It also destabilizes his company. With Nathaniel gone, and presumed to be a philandering deserter, the board is in chaos. The stock has taken a hit. It makes Blackwood Industries vulnerable. Vanguard could even be positioning for a hostile takeover." Evelyn felt sick. The betrayal, the public humiliation she had suffered. It wasn't personal. It was a calculated business strategy. She was a pawn in a multi-billion-dollar corporate war. The thought was somehow both a relief and a profound violation. The man she loved hadn't callously thrown her away. He had been targeted, and she had been used as collateral damage. The argument he was having on the phone the night he disappeared. Harding said, "I got a partial trace on the number. It was a burner, but it pinged off a tower near Vanguard's headquarters. He was likely talking to one of them. Maybe Croft, maybe Gregor." "What about the cheating itself?" Evelyn asked the question, tasting like ash. "Was that real? Was he in on it?" The doubt was a sliver of ice in her heart. Harding sighed, his gaze softening slightly. "That's the part I can't figure out. Was he a willing participant in a long-term affair with Vance, and she simply used the opportunity to set him up? Or was he coerced that night, blackmailed into it? Gregor's presence suggests they play dirty. A threat against you, perhaps, against the baby." The idea hit Evelyn with the force of a physical blow. The possibility that Nathaniel had been forced into that embrace, that the look of horror on his face was not just guilt, but genuine fear for her. It reframed the entire memory. It didn't erase the pain, but it changed its shape. "So what do we do?" Evelyn asked, her voice shaking but firm. "We can't go to the police with this. They'll dismiss it as corporate conspiracy theories." "We can't," Harding agreed. "Croft is too powerful, too well-connected. He'd bury us in litigation and bury the evidence even deeper. We need proof, something concrete that ties him and Vanguard to Nathaniel's disappearance." "The study," Evelyn said immediately. "The missing file, the scratch marks. There has to be something else in that room, something Nathaniel hid." "It's a huge risk going back there and searching now," Harding warned. "Genevieve is watching you. If she thinks you're up to something—" "I don't have a choice," Evelyn stated, her resolve hardening into steel. "Nathaniel's mother may hate me, but she loves her son. If I can find proof, real proof, she might be the only person powerful enough to help me fight Donovan Croft." She left the diner with a clear, albeit terrifying, purpose. The game was no longer about a cheating husband. It was about a missing man, a stolen legacy, and a ruthless enemy who had underestimated the woman he'd left behind. Evelyn Blackwood was done being a pawn. It was time to start playing the game herself. Returning to the manor felt different. The oppressive silence no longer felt like grief. It felt like the quiet before a storm. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret, every creak of the floorboards a potential threat. Harding's warnings echoed in her mind. She was in a house full of people loyal to the Blackwood name, but she had no idea who, if anyone, she could trust. Her first obstacle was Genevieve. Evelyn knew a direct confrontation would be disastrous. She needed to approach the matriarch carefully, not with wild accusations, but with undeniable facts. She needed the proof that was likely hidden somewhere in Nathaniel's study. For 2 days, she watched the household's rhythm. Genevieve spent her mornings in the East Wing conservatory and her afternoons taking calls in her private office. The study was typically unoccupied during this time. It was her only window. On the 3rd day, she put her plan into motion. Feigning a pregnancy-related headache, she retired to her room after breakfast, asking the staff not to disturb her. Once she was sure she was alone, she slipped out and made her way to the West Wing. The study was just as she remembered a shrine to a man who was now a ghost. Her heart ached as she ran a hand over his leather chair. Forcing the emotion down, she went straight to the massive bookshelf where she'd seen the scratch marks. She examined the area again more closely this time. The marks were near the baseboard, hidden behind a decorative scrollwork panel. It looked seamless, but when she pushed on it, there was a slight give. Her breath hitched. Using her fingernails, she carefully pried at the edge. The panel popped open with a soft click, revealing not a keyhole, but a small digital keypad. A password. It could be anything. A birthday, an anniversary. She tried the date they met their wedding date. His birthday, her birthday. Nothing. After the 5th failed attempt, the keypad flashed red and went dark, a 10-minute lockout. Panic began to set in. She was about to give up when the door to the study swung open. Genevieve Blackwood stood there. Her arms crossed her face, a thunderous mask. "Looking for something, Evelyn." Evelyn froze her blood, turning to ice. She was caught. "Genevieve, I can explain." "Can you?" Genevieve stepped into the room, her eyes falling to the open panel and the keypad. "Snooping through my son's private things. Were you looking for a hidden will? A secret bank account? No." Evelyn stood up, her voice stronger than she expected. "I was looking for the truth. The truth about what happened to Nathaniel." Genevieve let out a short, bitter laugh. "The truth is, he humiliated you and this family and then ran off like a coward. The sooner you accept that, the better." "You don't believe that any more than I do." Evelyn shot back, her fear replaced by a surge of desperate courage. "You knew your son. He was a lot of things, but he was not a coward. He wouldn't abandon his company, and he wouldn't abandon his child." She saw a flicker of something in Genevieve's eyes, a crack in the marble facade. Evelyn seized the opening. She pulled the burner phone from her pocket, the one Harding had given her. "I hired an investigator, Genevieve." Her mother-in-law's eyes narrowed. "You did what?" "A good one," Evelyn pressed on. "And he's found things that point to Donovan Croft and Vanguard Corp. He believes Nathaniel was abducted as part of a plan to steal his Project Nightingale research and take over the company." She quickly laid out everything Harding had told her about the government contract, the suspiciously similar proposal from Vanguard, the ex-Special Forces thug on Croft's payroll. She didn't hold anything back. Genevieve listened, her expression unreadable. When Evelyn finished, the silence was heavy. "And the affair?" Genevieve asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Was that part of your investigator's theory as well?" "We think it was staged," Evelyn said, her own voice dropping. "A smokescreen. A way to discredit him and create a cover story for his disappearance. They may have threatened him, Genevieve. Threatened me. Or the baby." She placed a hand on her stomach, and for the first time she saw raw, unfiltered emotion on her mother-in-law's face. It was fear. Fear for her son, and fear for her unborn grandchild. The fortress was crumbling. "Donovan Croft," Genevieve whispered the name, tasting like poison. "My husband Nathaniel's father always said Croft was a viper, that he would burn the world down to rule over the ashes." She walked over to the keypad and stared at it. If Nathaniel was in trouble, if he feared someone was coming for him, he would have left a contingency, a fail-safe. He was always 3 steps ahead. She looked at Evelyn, her eyes no longer filled with suspicion, but with a dawning, terrible understanding. "You were not a weakness he succumbed to. You were the one thing he wanted to protect." The words hung in the air, a tacit apology and a declaration of a truce. A new fragile alliance was being forged in the crucible of their shared crisis. "This keypad," Genevieve said, her voice now crisp and businesslike. "It won't be a date. It would be something only family would know, something from his childhood." She paused, her mind clearly racing back through the years. Then her eyes lit up with a faint spark. "Try 081495. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she typed in the code. "What is it?" "The call number of the first library book he ever checked out on his own," Genevieve said softly. "A book about building forts. He was so proud." As she pressed the final digit, there was a soft, whirring sound. The keypad glowed green, and a section of the bookshelf beside it clicked open, revealing a hidden compartment. A small steel safe was nestled inside. Evelyn and Genevieve looked at each other. They had crossed a threshold. They were no longer mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, locked in a silent war of disapproval. They were partners united by the man they both loved, and standing before the first real clue that could bring him home, or failing, that bring his enemies to justice. The safe was a formidable block of polished steel. It wasn't a combination lock, but a biometric scanner requiring a fingerprint. Genevieve's regal composure faltered for a moment. "Of course," she murmured in frustration. "Nathaniel's fingerprint. We're no further ahead." Evelyn's mind raced. Nathaniel was meticulous, but he was also sentimental. He planned for every contingency. If he'd set this up knowing he might be taken, he would have created a backup. "Is there anyone else?" Evelyn asked. "Someone he trusted implicitly. Someone whose fingerprint might also be registered." Genevieve was about to say no, when a new voice spoke from the doorway. "Try me." They both turned. Oliver Blackwood, Nathaniel's younger brother, stood leaning against the doorframe. Oliver was the family's charming rogue, a stark contrast to his serious older brother. He spent more time on yachts and in Aspen than he did in the boardroom, and Genevieve often lamented his lack of ambition. Now his usual carefree expression was gone, replaced by a somber gravity. "Oliver." "What are you doing here?" Genevieve demanded, flustered. "I heard voices, saw the door was ajar," he said, walking into the room. His eyes took in the scene, the open panel, the exposed safe. "Looks like the party's finally getting interesting." He looked at Evelyn, his gaze holding a surprising depth of sympathy. "I never believed he just ran off. Nate's not built that way." "His fingerprint won't work, Oliver," Genevieve said dismissively. "This is serious." "Maybe it will," Oliver replied, stepping forward. "We set this up together years ago after a security scare. He was the primary, I was the secondary. A dead man's switch," he called it. Morbid, I know, but that was my brother. Without another word, Oliver placed his thumb on the scanner. It glowed blue whirred for a second, and then the safe unlocked with a heavy, satisfying thud. Evelyn's heart leaped into her throat. Oliver pulled the heavy door open. The contents were not what she expected. There were no stacks of cash or bearer bonds. Instead, there were two items, a slim, encrypted hard drive and a simple black burner phone. Oliver handed the hard drive to Evelyn. This is it, his insurance policy. They took the items to the large monitor on Nathaniel's desk. Oliver, who despite his playboy persona, was a tech prodigy, connected the drive. A password prompt immediately filled the screen. Here we go again, Genevieve sighed. Don't worry, I know this one too, Oliver said with a sad smile. It was the name of his dog when we were kids, the one he rescued from the shelter. He typed in the letters SHADOW. The screen flickered, and a single protected video file appeared. Oliver clicked play. Nathaniel's face filled the screen. He looked tired, stressed, and was sitting in this very study. The video was time-stamped just 3 days before the wedding. If you are watching this, he began, his voice strained, it means I'm gone, and things have gone terribly wrong. He looked directly into the camera, and Evelyn felt as if he were speaking directly to her. For the past 6 months, I've been under pressure from Donovan Croft and Vanguard Corp. He wanted my Project Nightingale technology. I refused to sell. So he tried other methods. Threats, blackmail. He uncovered a financial mistake my father made years ago, something that could tarnish the Blackwood name. He threatened to expose it. Genevieve gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I fought back. Nathaniel continued, his jaw tight with anger. And in doing so, I uncovered something much worse. Croft isn't just a corporate shark. He's a criminal. Vanguard has been using shell corporations to do business with sanctioned regimes, funding conflicts to gain access to rare earth minerals needed for our kind of technology. Project Nightingale would have made his entire illegal supply chain obsolete and exposed him in the process. He wasn't just trying to steal my tech, he was trying to ensure his own survival. He paused, running a hand through his hair. He knows that I know. His threats have escalated. He mentioned you, Evelyn. He mentioned our baby. I realized he wouldn't just stop at me. He would come after my family. Tears streamed down Evelyn's face. Harding had been right. Which brings me to the wedding, Nathaniel said, his expression turning to one of deep pain. Victoria Vance has been on Croft's payroll for years. She was his weapon. They gave me an ultimatum: throw the deal, discredit myself, and push my family away, or they would harm Evelyn. They wanted to isolate me, to make me a pariah, so that when they took me, no one would look too closely. His voice broke. The scene on our wedding night. It was their design, a horrific piece of theater. I fought it, but they showed me. They showed me photographs of you, Evelyn, surveillance photos. They were watching you. I had no choice. I had to make you hate me. I had to make you leave. I thought it was the only way to protect you. It was the greatest mistake of my life. The video was his confession and his absolution. The betrayal that had shattered her world was in fact a desperate, clumsy act of love. All the evidence is on this drive, Nathaniel's voice concluded. The offshore accounts, the shipping manifests, my communication with Croft's intermediaries. Everything the authorities need to dismantle his empire. Get this to someone you trust. His eyes found the camera one last time. Evelyn, I love you. Protect our child. Find me. The screen went black. For a long moment the room was silent, save for Evelyn's quiet sobs. Genevieve put a comforting hand on her shoulder, the gesture feeling both strange and profoundly right. Oliver picked up the burner phone from the safe. He powered it on. There was a single unsent text message saved as a draft. It was dated the night of the wedding, just minutes before he vanished. It read, "They have me. Project Nightingale is the key. Trust no one. Protect our child." They finally had it. The truth. Nathaniel wasn't a runaway groom. He was a prisoner of war in a corporate conflict. The betrayal was a sacrifice, and the people responsible had names and faces. The grief in the room began to recede, replaced by something cold, hard, and resolute. Justice. The revelation from the hard drive transformed the atmosphere in Blackwood Manor from one of mourning to a clandestine war room. The lines of battle had been drawn. On one side stood Evelyn Genevieve, and Oliver, an unlikely triumvirate of a betrayed wife, a grieving mother, and an underestimated brother. On the other side was Donovan Croft, a man who commanded a shadowy empire, shielded by wealth and power. Genevieve, galvanized by the truth about her son, became the formidable matriarch Evelyn had only ever seen glimpses of. The icy disapproval was replaced by a steely, pragmatic fury. She worked her network making quiet calls to powerful, trusted contacts in finance and politics, people whose loyalty was to the Blackwood family, not just the company. She spoke in hypotheticals and veiled warnings, planting seeds of doubt about Vanguard Corp., priming the ground for the storm to come. Oliver, shedding his carefree persona like a snake, sheds its skin, became their technology and strategy expert. He made multiple encrypted copies of the hard drive, storing them in secure locations. He worked with Harding to analyze the data, cross-referencing shipping logs with shell corporations, creating an unassailable chain of evidence that linked Donovan Croft directly to international crimes. He proved to be as brilliant and meticulous as his older brother, his laid-back nature a clever camouflage for a razor-sharp mind. Evelyn was the heart of the operation. She was the keeper of Nathaniel's memory, the moral compass that guided their mission. She pored over his notes on Project Nightingale, not just the technical data, but his personal annotations about his vision for the project to create clean, affordable energy to build a better world for his child. This wasn't just about revenge or rescuing Nathaniel anymore. It was about protecting his legacy. Harding became their field general. Working with the irrefutable proof from the drive, he quietly approached a contact he trusted at the Department of Justice, someone in the complex financial crimes unit who was known for being immune to political pressure. He presented the case not as a kidnapping, but as a matter of national security and massive financial fraud, ensuring it would be handled by the most serious investigators. The days were a blur of hushed meetings, encrypted emails, and strategic planning. Evelyn found a strength she never knew she possessed. The vulnerability of her pregnancy was now a source of power. She was fighting for her child's future, for their right to know their father as the hero. He was not the villain the world believed him to be. She and Genevieve, once adversaries, now shared meals, poring over documents, and offering each other a quiet, resolute support. They were bound by a shared love and a common enemy. They decided to strike. The plan had two phases. First, Oliver would anonymously leak a small, carefully selected portion of the financial data to a renowned investigative journalist known for taking down corporate titans. This would ignite the media firestorm and put public pressure on Vanguard Corp. Second, as Vanguard's stock plummeted and regulators began to swarm, Harding's DOJ contact would unseal the indictments and execute federal warrants on Donovan Croft and his key associates, including Victoria Vance. The night before the leak, the three of them gathered in the study. The room was no longer a place of sorrow, but a command center. "Once we do this, there's no turning back," Genevieve said, her voice steady. "Croft will retaliate. He will try to harm us." "We'll be ready," Oliver stated, his eyes fixed on his laptop screen. He had already arranged for enhanced security for all of them. Evelyn walked to the window, looking out at the dark, sprawling grounds of the estate. She rested a hand on her stomach, feeling the strong, reassuring kick of her baby. She was no longer the naive, love-struck girl in the wedding dress. The fire of her ordeal hadn't consumed her. It had forged her into something stronger. The pain of Nathaniel's betrayal had been replaced by a profound understanding of his sacrifice. She had found the truth. She had cleared his name. Now it was time to bring him home. "Do it," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. With a final keystroke, Oliver sent the encrypted file. The first shot in their war had been fired. The outcome was uncertain. The path ahead was perilous. Donovan Croft was a wounded animal, and wounded animals are the most dangerous. They still didn't know where Nathaniel was or if he was even alive. But looking at the determined faces of Genevieve and Oliver, feeling the life moving inside her, Evelyn knew they would not fail. Her fairy tale had ended on her wedding night, but a new story was just beginning. It was not a story of a princess in a gilded cage, but of a queen on a battlefield, fighting for her family, her legacy, and her love. The battle for Blackwood Industries and for Nathaniel Blackwood himself had just begun. Evelyn's world crumbled on what should have been the happiest night of her life, but from the ashes of betrayal, she rose as a warrior. Armed with the devastating truth, she stands with her newfound allies against a ruthless billionaire who holds her husband's life in his hands. The battle lines are drawn, the first shot has been fired, but the war is far from over. Will they succeed in exposing Donovan Croft's criminal empire? Can they rescue Nathaniel from the clutches of a man who will stop at nothing to protect his secrets? And what will be the ultimate cost of justice for the Blackwood family? The story of love, loss, and vengeance is only just getting started. If you are on the edge of your seat and need to know what happens next, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a good drama, and most importantly, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss part 2. A wedding invitation printed on thick, pearlescent cardstock arrives at the doorstep of a small, cramped apartment. It's for the marriage of Michael Graham to Vanessa Reed. But the recipient isn't a friend or a distant relative. She is Jessica Hartwell Michael's wife of 7 years, 8 months pregnant with his child. He didn't even have the decency to file for divorce first. This single piece of paper was not just an invitation. It was a declaration of war, the beginning of a story of ultimate betrayal. But it was also the catalyst for a revenge so complete, so breathtaking, that it would take 20 years to unfold, culminating in her son holding the fate of his father's entire empire in the palm of his hand. The air in their Greenwich, Connecticut home always smelled of something expensive. Sometimes it was the Dutch tulips Michael had delivered twice a week. Other times it was the faint, clean scent of the leather on his new Aston Martin. For Jessica Hartwell Graham, it was the smell of success, or so she'd told herself. Their life was a carefully curated masterpiece. Michael, a razor-sharp vice president at Sterling Coal Capital, was the kind of man whose ambition was a physical force, pulling everyone in his orbit along for the ride. Jessica, a talented architect, who had set aside her own burgeoning career to support his, was the perfect counterpart, elegant, intelligent, and the gracious host of countless dinner parties designed to propel Michael further up the corporate ladder. Their brownstone was her canvas. She had redesigned it from a hollowed-out shell into a warm, modern sanctuary of glass, steel, and reclaimed wood. It was featured in Modern Living Quarterly. Friends would whisper, "Jessica, you're a genius. You should start your own firm." She would smile, a practiced, gentle curve of her lips, and say, "Maybe one day. Right now, my biggest project is on its way." She would place a hand on her swelling belly, and the conversation would shift to baby names and nursery colors. The baby, a boy, was their final masterpiece, the keystone in the arch of their perfect life. They had settled on the name Daniel. Michael had been ecstatic, or at least he had performed ecstasy convincingly. He'd kissed her belly in front of their friends, the Baldwins and the Carters, and declared himself the luckiest man alive. But in the quiet moments when the performance ended, cracks began to show. They were hairline fractures, at first easy to ignore. He started staying later at the office, his excuses seamless tapestries of closing a big deal or mentoring a new analyst. The new analyst's name, she would later learn, was Vanessa Reed. Then came the phone calls he would take on the terrace, his voice a low, urgent murmur that the wind snatched away. A new cloying scent started clinging to his suits, a perfume that wasn't hers, something sweet and cheap. When she asked, he'd laugh it off. "Must be from someone in the elevator, Jess. You know how those things are." He was a master gaslighter, turning her valid suspicions into evidence of her own hormonal paranoia. "It's just the pregnancy, honey," he'd say, stroking her hair. "Your senses are on high alert. Relax." And she tried. She wanted to believe him more than anything. This life, this man, this unborn child, they were her everything. To doubt Michael was to doubt her own judgment to admit that the entire structure of her world was built on a lie. So she painted the nursery a soft, calming blue, assembled the crib with her own 2 hands, and folded tiny onesies with a growing sense of dread she couldn't name. The last good evening was a Tuesday in May. The air was thick with the scent of blooming wisteria from the garden. Jessica had made his favorite osso buco, a slow-braised labor of love. He was late as usual, but when he walked in, he was carrying a small velvet box from Tiffany & Co. Her heart leaped. An apology. A recognition of his distance. "I saw this, and thought of you," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. She opened it. Inside lay a delicate silver rattle exquisitely crafted. It was a beautiful, thoughtful gift for their son. She felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost made her dizzy. She was being foolish paranoid. He loved her. He loved their baby. "Oh, Michael, it's perfect," she whispered, tears welling. He hugged her, but his embrace felt different, hollow, perfunctory. He held her for a moment, his chin resting on her head, his eyes staring blankly at the wall behind her. It wasn't the hug of a husband. It was the hug of a man saying goodbye. He just hadn't told her yet. 3 days later, he went on a business trip to Chicago. On Saturday morning, Jessica was sorting through their credit card statements online, preparing to pay the bills, when she saw a charge that made the air freeze in her lungs. A charge from the night before, not from a Hyatt in Chicago, but from a small, notoriously romantic boutique hotel called the Arbor Inn, just 40 miles away in Westport. And beneath it, another charge from a jeweler in the same town, Bvlgari, Serpentini necklace, $28,000. She had never received a Serpentini necklace. The silver rattle suddenly felt like a cheap prop, a diversion. The perfect life, the gilded cage, didn't just have cracks. The floor had just fallen out. The silence in the house was a living thing. It pulsed in the space where Michael's laughter used to be. For hours, Jessica just sat at her polished concrete kitchen island, staring at the laptop screen. The 2 lines of text, "The Arbor in Bvulgari," were like a death sentence. Every late night, every hushed phone call, every dismissive laugh clicked into place, forming a sickeningly clear picture. She called his phone. It went straight to voicemail. "Michael Graham's office. I'm currently unavailable." His voice, so smooth and professional, felt like a stranger's. She called again, and again. On the 7th try, a woman answered. The voice was young, a little breathless, and laced with annoyance. "Hello," Jessica's blood ran cold. I'm trying to reach Michael Graham. This is his number." There was a muffled sound, and then the woman's voice, sharper this time. "Who is this?" "This is his wife, Jessica," said the words, tasting like ash. A pause. Then a saccharine sweetness dripped into the woman's tone. "Oh, you must be Jessica. Michael's told me so much about you. He should be back in a bit. We just stepped out for brunch. The word was a slap. Jessica hung up without another word, her hand trembling so violently she could barely hit the screen. He walked in 2 hours later, looking refreshed, tanned, and utterly unapologetic. He placed his briefcase on the floor and loosened his tie, not even looking at her. "Hey, I'm back." "The trip was a killer," he said, heading for the refrigerator. Jessica stood motionless, the laptop still open on the island. "How was Westport?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. He froze his hand on the refrigerator door. He turned slowly, and for the first time the mask of the doting husband fell away completely. His face was cold, impassive. There was no shock, no guilt, only a weary annoyance, as if she were a mild inconvenience he finally had to deal with. "So, you know," he said. It wasn't a question. "I know you spent last night at the Arbor Inn. I know you bought a $28,000 necklace that I never saw. Who is she, Michael?" "Her name is Vanessa Reed," he said, his tone flat. "She's an analyst at the firm. And I love her." The words were so simple, so brutal. They bypassed her brain and went straight to her heart, shattering it like glass. She clutched her stomach, a protective instinct for the innocent life caught in the crossfire. "You love her," Jessica's voice cracked. "What about us? What about this baby?" "Your son, Jessica." "Let's not be dramatic," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Things haven't been right between us for a long time. We've been living like roommates. This is for the best. Roommates, I have given up my entire life for you, for us. I am carrying your child," she screamed, the sound raw and torn from her throat. "And I will provide for the child, of course," he said, as if discussing a business transaction. "I'm not a monster. I'll set up a generous trust. You'll be taken care of." That was when the true horror of the situation dawned on her. This wasn't a confession. This was a notification. He had already made his decision. He had a plan. She and their unborn son were line items in his budget for a new life. "I want you out," she whispered, tears finally streaming down her face. He actually smirked. "I think you have it backward, Jess. This house is in my name. The assets are mine. My lawyer will be in touch with you on Monday to discuss the arrangements. I suggest you find your own counsel." He turned and walked towards the stairs. "I'll just pack a bag. I'll be staying with Vanessa from now on." The next few days were a blur of legal jargon and humiliation. Michael's lawyer, a piranha named Arthur Finch, was ruthless. He presented a prenuptial agreement Jessica had signed 7 years ago, a document she barely remembered thinking it a mere formality for a man from a wealthy family. The agreement was ironclad. She was entitled to a small one-time settlement, but the house, The cars, the investments, they were all his. We are prepared to offer a monthly child support payment that is adequate, Finch said, his lips curling around the word as if it were distasteful. Jessica's lawyer, a kind but overwhelmed woman named Maria, advised her to take it. Fighting him will drain you emotionally and financially. He has the resources to drag this out for years. Defeated and heartbroken, Jessica agreed. She was given 2 weeks to vacate the home she had poured her soul into. While she packed her life into cardboard boxes, a moving truck arrived with Michael's things, and a sleek black Porsche pulled into the driveway. Out stepped Vanessa Reed. She was everything Jessica wasn't. Younger by at least a decade, with long platinum blonde hair, a surgically perfected figure poured into a designer dress, and a look of triumphant ownership on her face. She walked up the stone path, not even glancing at Jessica, and began directing the movers as if she'd lived there for years. The final soul-crushing blow came a week after she moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment her parents helped her secure. It was a wedding invitation. Michael Graham and Vanessa Reed requested the honor of her presence at their marriage ceremony. It was to be held in 3 weeks at the Greenwich Country Club. He hadn't even waited for the ink to dry on their separation papers, let alone file for divorce. He was flaunting it, rubbing her nose in his betrayal, showing the world how quickly he had replaced her. Jessica crumpled the invitation in her fist, a guttural sob escaping her lips. She slid down the wall of her small, empty apartment, surrounded by boxes filled with the remnants of a shattered life. She was 35 years old, 8 months pregnant, and utterly alone. This wasn't just a breakup. It was a demolition. Michael hadn't just left her, he had erased her. The weeks that followed were a descent into a gray, featureless landscape of grief. Jessica moved through the days like a ghost haunting the edges of her own life. The small apartment in Stamford felt like a prison. The smell of fresh paint and new carpets couldn't mask the scent of failure. She'd go from unpacking a box of baby clothes, her hands tracing the tiny embroidered animals, to collapsing in a heap of tears, the weight of her solitude pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. Her friends tried to help. Her best friend Beth would come over with groceries and sit with her for hours, offering a steady, silent presence when words were useless. But many of the couple friends she and Michael had shared quietly vanished. Their invitations to barbecues and brunches stopped. She was a social liability now, a walking pregnant reminder that perfect marriages could implode overnight. She had been relegated to the island of divorced women, a place they didn't want to acknowledge existed. The day of Michael and Vanessa's wedding was the lowest point. The sun shone with an obscene cheerfulness. Jessica knew, because she'd tortured herself by looking it up online, that the ceremony was at 4 p.m. At 4:15, she imagined Vanessa walking down the aisle in a cloud of white silk, her father's place at the altar, filled by a man who was still legally Jessica's husband. She pictured their friends, her friends applauding, toasting the happy couple, celebrating on the ruins of her life. The humiliation was a physical pain, a hot poker twisting in her gut. That evening, the first contraction hit. It was sharp, sudden, and terrifying. It was too early. Panicked, she called Beth, who rushed her to the hospital. The labor was long and arduous, a 22-hour ordeal fueled by stress and heartbreak. There was no loving husband holding her hand, no one whispering words of encouragement. There was only the clinical beeping of machines, the sterile smell of antiseptic, and the crushing weight of doing the most profound thing a woman can do completely alone. At 2:17 p.m. the next day, Daniel Hartwell was born. Jessica had made a decision in the throes of labor. Her son would not carry the name of the man who had abandoned him. He would carry her name, the name of the one who stayed. Holding him for the first time, a tiny, fragile being with a tuft of dark hair and his mother's gray eyes, something inside Jessica shifted. The endless gray landscape of her grief was suddenly pierced by a single, brilliant ray of light. This tiny person wholly dependent on her was not a burden. He was a reason. His small, grasping hand clutching her finger was an anchor in the storm. She looked into his newborn face and made a silent vow Michael Graham might have taken her past, but he would not take their future. The first few years were a relentless grind. The settlement money, which had seemed substantial in the lawyer's office, evaporated with frightening speed. Rent, diapers, formula, medical bills. It was a constant draining hemorrhage of funds. The adequate child support Michael provided barely covered Daniel's daycare. It was a calculated amount, just enough to fulfill his legal obligation, but not enough to provide any real comfort, a final twist of the knife. Jessica was forced to sell the few pieces of valuable jewelry she had from her marriage, each sale, feeling like she was auctioning off a piece of her own history. She took on freelance drafting work, staying up until 3 a.m., after Daniel was asleep, her eyes burning from staring at a computer screen, her back aching from the cheap office chair she'd bought at a thrift store. She saw Michael and Vanessa's life only in glossy snapshots in society magazines that Beth would quickly hide when she came to visit. The Grahams at the winter ball, Vanessa, Graham chairs, charity gala. They had twin daughters, Piper and Paisley, always dressed in matching designer outfits. Their world of polo matches and European vacations was so far removed from her reality of clipping coupons and worrying about the electricity bill that it might as well have been on another planet. There was one encounter she couldn't avoid. When Daniel was 4, she ran into them at a high-end toy store. She had saved for months to buy him a specific Lego set for his birthday. As she stood in the checkout line, she heard that familiar booming laugh. Michael was standing by a display of enormous ride-on electric cars, with Vanessa beside him, looking bored. Their 2 daughters were flitting between toys, grabbing whatever they wanted. Michael spotted her. His face registered a brief flash of something, was it shock, guilt? Before settling back into his usual mask of cool indifference. "Jessica?" he said, his voice a little too loud. "Fancy seeing you here." Vanessa's eyes swept over Jessica's sensible jeans and worn-out coat, then down to the single Lego box in her hand. A faint, condescending smile played on her lips. "Hello, Michael." "Vanessa." Jessica said, her voice steady. She pulled Daniel, who was hiding behind her legs, forward. "This is Daniel." Michael looked down at his son, the son he had never once asked to see, as if observing a curious specimen. He offered a tight corporate smile. "Big guy, aren't you?" He didn't offer to shake his hand or touch him. "Daddy, I want this one, and this one," one of his daughters whined, tugging on his sleeve. "Of course, sweetie, whatever you want." Michael said, his attention immediately shifting. He pulled out a black credit card and handed it to the sales assistant. "We'll take all 3 of the cars, and whatever else the girls have picked out." The bill came to several $1,000s. He signed the slip without even looking at the total. As they left, laden with bags, Vanessa gave Jessica one last pitying look over her shoulder. It was a look that said, "I won. You lost. This is my life now, and you're just a footnote." As Jessica paid for her single box of Legos with her carefully saved cash, the cashier gave her a sympathetic glance. Jessica just smiled, squeezed Daniel's hand, and walked out. The humiliation still stung, but as she looked at her son's excited face, she felt a different emotion taking root, a cold, hard resolve. Pity was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had work to do. The encounter at the toy store was the catalyst. Humiliation, Jessica realized, was a powerful fuel if you knew how to use it. That night, after putting Daniel to bed, she didn't open her freelance drafting software. Instead, she opened a dusty portfolio case from the back of her closet. Inside were her old architectural drawings from college and her brief time at a firm before Michael. Spreading them across her small living room floor, she saw not just designs for buildings, but blueprints of a life she had abandoned. The spark was still there. She felt a familiar thrill looking at the elegant lines, the innovative use of space. But a firm wouldn't hire a single mother who'd been out of the industry for nearly a decade. She had no capital, no connections. All she had was a laptop, a keen eye for design, and a burning need to build a life where no one could ever look at her with pity again. Her big idea didn't arrive in a flash of lightning. It started as a small, practical problem. The daycare Daniel attended was a dreary, cramped space with poor lighting and no functional play areas. The parents complained constantly, but the owner, a kind woman named Mrs. Gable, had no budget for a professional renovation. On a whim, Jessica stayed late one afternoon and sketched out a new floor plan on a napkin. She envisioned knocking down a non-structural wall to create an open-plan space, designing modular multifunctional furniture that could be used for play and storage, and adding large, low-set windows to bring in natural light. It was simple, cost-effective, and transformative. She showed the sketch to Mrs. Gable, expecting nothing, but the woman's eyes lit up. "My goodness, dear, this is wonderful." Over the next 2 months, Jessica worked for free. She rallied the parents into a volunteer force. She sweet-talked a local lumber yard, Peterson's Lumber, into donating materials. She spent her weekends painting walls and assembling furniture, with Daniel helping by making a mess with his own set of toy tools. When it was finished, the daycare was unrecognizable. It was bright, airy, and joyful. The parents were astounded. One of them, a man named Robert Miller, who ran a popular local blog about family life in Fairfield County, was so impressed he wrote a feature story about the project. He called it The Stamford Daycare Miracle: How One Mom Reimagined a Space with Heart and Soul. He included photos of Jessica smiling and paint-splattered, and praised her genius for family-centric sustainable design. The blog post went viral locally. Jessica's phone began to ring. It wasn't a flood, but it was a start. A young couple wanted her to redesign their cramped kitchen. A family needed help turning their damp basement into a usable playroom. Her fees were modest, but for the first time in years, it was her own money earned from her own talent. She decided to formalize her business. She named it Hartwell Designs. She used a small inheritance from her grandmother to build a professional website showcasing her work with high-quality before and after photos. Her niche became clear. She wasn't creating sterile minimalist spaces for wealthy bachelors. She was designing for real families. She focused on sustainability, using reclaimed materials and energy-efficient solutions long before it was trendy, because for her clients, saving money on utility bills mattered. She understood that a home wasn't just a showpiece, it was the backdrop for a life. Her reputation grew through word of mouth. Each project was a brick, and she was slowly, painstakingly building a new foundation for herself and her son. It was an exhausting existence. She was the CEO, the designer, the project manager, and the bookkeeper, all while being a full-time single mother. There were nights she fell into bed too tired to even dream the scent of sawdust in her hair. Daniel was the center of her new world. He grew up on construction sites, learning the difference between a Phillips and a flathead screwdriver before he could properly ride a bike. He saw his mother's exhaustion, but more importantly, he saw her resilience. He saw her commanding the respect of contractors, negotiating with suppliers, and calming anxious clients. He was watching his mother build an empire from ashes, one brick at a time. One evening when Daniel was about 8, he was sitting at the kitchen table, sketching in a notepad, while Jessica reviewed blueprints. "Mom," he said, his voice serious, "when I grow up, I'm going to build a company too. And I'm going to make so much money that you never have to be tired again." Jessica looked at him, at his determined little face, and her heart swelled with a love so fierce it almost hurt. She knelt beside him and wrapped him in a hug. "You don't have to worry about that, sweetie," she whispered into his hair. "I'm not tired. I'm building." She wasn't just building houses. She was building a future, a legacy, and a fortress. And she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that its walls would be impenetrable. The next decade was a blur of relentless work and steady upward momentum. Hartwell Designs became the go-to firm in Connecticut for thoughtful, family-oriented architecture. Jessica's name became synonymous with a specific kind of understated luxury homes that were not only beautiful, but also livable, intuitive, and deeply personal. She was no longer the woman taking on small kitchen remodels. She was now designing multi-million-dollar homes from the ground up in Greenwich and New Canaan, often for clients who were quietly defecting from the soulless, ostentatious firms that Michael and his crowd favored. She was featured in Architectural Digest not as a local blogger's miracle mom, but as a visionary designer. The article praised her empathetic approach to architecture and her unwavering commitment to sustainable practices. She bought a beautiful light-filled house on a leafy street in a good school district, a home she designed and built for herself and Daniel. It was her name on the deed. Every nail, every beam was a testament to her own strength. Daniel, meanwhile, was growing into a quiet, intensely intelligent young man. He had his mother's sharp, analytical mind, but a passion for a different kind of architecture, the architecture of systems of code of financial markets. He had watched her struggle with the business side of her firm, the invoicing, the project management, the labyrinthine process of securing permits and sourcing materials. While other kids were playing video games, Daniel was teaching himself to code building small programs to help her streamline her operations. He was a straight-A student, but his real education happened at the dinner table listening to his mother talk about her work. He understood cash flow profit margins and the importance of a brand before he was old enough to drive. He also understood on a visceral level what his father had done. Jessica had never spoken ill of Michael, but Daniel didn't need her to. He saw the story in the lines of fatigue that were etched around her eyes in her fierce independence, and in the way she always insisted on paying her own way, refusing to be dependent on anyone. He harbored a cold, controlled anger towards the man who had caused his mother so much pain. In contrast, the Graham family's foundation was beginning to show signs of stress. Michael had made partner at Sterling Coal, his wealth and influence growing exponentially. Their life was a spectacle of excess. Vanessa, with no career of her own, dedicated herself to being a professional consumer. Their daughters Piper and Paisley grew into petulant, entitled teenagers, miniature versions of their mother. Their family was a perfect branding exercise, but underneath the surface it was hollow. Michael's success was built on high-risk, high-reward investment strategies. In the booming market of the late 2010s, he looked like a genius. He leveraged himself to the hilt, buying a larger mansion, a private jet, a yacht. He mistook the bull market for personal brilliance, a common and fatal mistake. The first tremor came during a minor market correction. One of Michael's highly leveraged funds took a significant hit. It was a taste of what was to come. At a charity event they were both obligated to attend, Jessica saw him across the room. He looked older, the skin around his eyes tighter with stress. He and Vanessa had a brief, sharp argument in a corner, their perfect facade cracking for a moment under the pressure. Vanessa's spending hadn't slowed, and for the first time, Michael seemed unable to sustain it effortlessly. Daniel, now a high school senior, was accepted into MIT's prestigious computer science and engineering program with a full scholarship. He was already working on an idea that had been percolating for years, born from watching his mother's struggles. It was a sophisticated software platform designed to revolutionize the construction and design industry. It would use AI to optimize supply chains, manage project timelines, automate permitting processes, and connect clients with vetted architects and contractors. He called it ArchLink. Jessica's firm became his first beta tester. The platform was brilliant. It cut her project costs by 15% and administrative time by 40%. It was intuitive, powerful, and years ahead of anything else on the market. While Daniel was packing for college, a piece of news sent a shockwave through the financial world. A massive, unforeseen global event, a pandemic, triggered a catastrophic market crash. Industries ground to a halt. The high-flying, debt-fueled stocks that formed the bedrock of Michael Graham's fortune were eviscerated overnight. Sterling Coal Capital was massively overexposed. The firm, once a titan of Wall Street, was suddenly on the brink of collapse. Michael's personal wealth, which was almost entirely tied up in company stock and leveraged real estate, vanished in a matter of weeks. The private jet was repossessed. The yacht was put up for sale at a fire sale price. The creditors began to circle. Jessica watched the news reports with a strange sense of detachment. There was no joy, no schadenfreude. It was like watching a building she had long known was structurally unsound finally begin to crumble. One crisp autumn evening, as Daniel was home from MIT for Thanksgiving break, Jessica's phone rang. It was an unknown number. She answered, and a voice she hadn't heard in nearly 20 years, a voice now stripped of its arrogance and laced with desperation, came through the line. "Jess, it's Michael. I need to talk to you. I'm in trouble. I'm in serious trouble." The foundation had not just shifted. It had broken. Daniel went from a gifted student to a tech phenomenon with breathtaking speed. While his classmates were pulling all-nighters for exams, Daniel, along with two equally brilliant friends from his dorm, was pulling all-nighters refining the code for ArchLink. He used the connections his mother had painstakingly built over 2 decades to secure his first round of seed funding. Architects and construction magnates who respected Jessica were willing to take a meeting with her prodigy son. They came in skeptical and left as investors. The platform launched during Daniel's junior year at MIT. Its timing was perfect. The post-crash world was desperate for efficiency, cost-cutting, and transparency in the construction industry. ArchLink offered all three. It wasn't just a piece of software. It was a comprehensive ecosystem that eliminated waste and streamlined every phase of a building project. Within 6 months, it was the industry standard. Within 2 years, it was a unicorn, a private company valued at over $1 billion. Daniel Hartwell, the boy who grew up on construction sites, was now one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. But he wore his wealth differently than his father had. He didn't buy supercars or yachts. He drove a modest electric vehicle and lived in a tastefully minimalist apartment in Boston. He invested heavily in his company in green technology and in a charitable foundation he established in his mother's name, the Hartwell Foundation, which funded affordable, sustainable housing projects in underprivileged communities. He was his mother's son, a builder, not a gambler. His fortune was built on something real, something tangible that provided value. It was the polar opposite of his father's, which had been a house of cards built on risky bets and market speculation. While Daniel's star ascended, Michael's plummeted into a black hole. The collapse of Sterling Coal was brutal and public. The firm was gutted, its assets sold off for pennies on the dollar to rivals. Michael, as a senior partner, was personally liable for a staggering amount of debt. The Greenwich mansion was seized by the bank. The designer clothes, the fine art, the jewelry, all of it was liquidated in a humiliating estate sale. Vanessa, who had married for a lifestyle, not for a partnership, could not handle the fall. The life she had known, the shopping sprees, the social status, the envy of other women was gone. The arguments between her and Michael became volcanic. Without the buffer of wealth, their hollow marriage was exposed for what it was, a transaction that had expired. She took their daughters, who were equally ill-equipped to handle a life without privilege, and moved in with her wealthy parents in Florida, filing for a bitter and acrimonious divorce. Michael Graham, the titan of Wall Street, was left with nothing but a mountain of debt and a small rented condo in a faceless suburban complex. He was unemployable. His name was toxic in the financial world, a cautionary tale of hubris and ruin. He was forced to take a humiliating job as a consultant for a small, third-rate firm, earning a salary that was less than his monthly mortgage had once been. Jessica and Daniel never spoke of him, but they were both aware of his downfall. It was a quiet, unspoken postscript to their lives. They were busy building their future. Jessica's firm was more successful than ever, often using Daniel's ArchLink platform to manage her increasingly ambitious projects. She was respected, fulfilled, and at peace. The ultimate twist of fate came not with a bang, but with a business proposal. One of the few remaining viable assets of the defunct Sterling Coal was its real estate investment trust, REIT, which held a portfolio of commercial properties. The trust was failing, mismanaged, and drowning in debt, but some of the underlying properties had potential. The banks holding the debt were looking for a buyer to take the whole toxic portfolio off their hands for a deeply discounted price. Daniel's company, flush with cash and looking to diversify, saw an opportunity. His acquisitions team, led by a sharp analyst named Ben Carter, the son of one of Jessica's old loyal friends, flagged the portfolio. It was a risky play, but with the right infusion of capital and a complete overhaul of management, it could be turned around and become incredibly profitable. Ben presented the plan to Daniel in the sleek, glass-walled boardroom of ArchLink's Boston headquarters. "The portfolio is a mess, but the bones are good," Ben explained, pointing to a projection on the screen. "The key is the current managing director. He's the last senior partner from the old guard, the only one who didn't get completely wiped out, but he's desperate. He's been trying to secure a bailout for months and failing. We can acquire the entire trust, including his controlling shares, for a fraction of its potential value. He'll have to sell. He has no other options." Daniel leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Who's the managing director?" Ben clicked to the next slide. A corporate headshot filled the screen. It was an older, haggard-looking Michael Graham. The room was silent. Ben, knowing the history, looked at Daniel, waiting for a reaction. Daniel stared at his father's face on the screen. He saw not the powerful man from society photos, but a defeated stranger. After a long moment, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepling in front of him. Draw up the offer. Ben Daniel said, his voice perfectly calm. But I want one condition. I will deliver the offer to Mr. Graham. In person. The meeting was set for a neutral location, a private conference room at the downtown offices of the bank that held the primary debt on the Sterling Coal REIT. It was a cold, impersonal space with a large mahogany table and a view of a gray, unforgiving sky. Michael arrived first, looking like a ghost of his former self. His suit, once bespoke, was now slightly too large for his thinner frame. His face was pale, his eyes puffy from sleepless nights. He was 60 years old and looked 80. He was expecting to meet with a team from a new tech fund, as the bank had told him. He was desperate. This meeting was his last hope to salvage any scrap of his professional life and avoid complete personal bankruptcy. The door opened. In walked not a team of analysts, but a single composed young man in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit. Michael squinted, a flicker of confused recognition in his eyes. He hadn't seen his son in person in over 15 years. Daniel, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Hello, Michael. Daniel said, his tone cool and professional. He didn't offer to shake hands. He simply took the seat at the head of the table, a position of undeniable power. He placed a slim leather portfolio in front of him. Michael stared, his mind struggling to process the reality of the situation. The new tech fund, the potential savior, was his son. The son he had abandoned. The son whose existence he had treated as a financial footnote. The sheer crushing weight of the irony seemed to suck the air from the room. Your company, Michael stammered. Archlink is the acquiring party. Yes, Daniel said, opening the portfolio. We are prepared to make an offer to purchase the controlling interest in the REIT, assume its debt, and prevent it from being dismantled by the creditors. A wave of dizzying, desperate hope washed over Michael. His son was here to save him. It was a miracle, a chance at redemption. Oh, Daniel, thank God. I always knew you were brilliant. This is wonderful. Daniel held up a hand, cutting him off. His expression remained unchanged, betraying no emotion. Let's be clear, Michael. This is not a rescue mission. This is a business transaction. My team has assessed the value of the portfolio. It's a distressed asset, and our offer reflects that. He slid a single sheet of paper across the polished table. Michael's trembling hand reached for it. He read the number, and the hope in his eyes died, replaced by utter devastation. The offer was for his shares, yes, but it was a rock-bottom valuation. It was just enough to clear his personal debts to the bank and leave him with a tiny, almost insulting amount of cash. Enough to live on, perhaps, in a small apartment, but not enough to ever reclaim a shadow of his former life. It was a clean amputation. It would save the company and its employees, but it would erase him completely. This is nothing, Michael choked out. This is a pittance. I built that company. You built it on sand, Daniel replied, his voice still unnervously calm. And the tide came in. This offer is fair market value for a failing entity. It's more than anyone else has offered you. In fact, it is the only offer. The alternative is the bank forecloses on Monday, and you walk away with absolutely nothing but the debt. The choice is yours. Michael looked at his son, truly looked at him, and for the first time he saw not a boy, but a man he didn't know, a man forged in a fire. Michael himself had set. He saw his mother's resilience, her intelligence, and a cold resolve that was all his own. There was no anger in Daniel's eyes, no hatred. There was something far more chilling indifference. Tears welled in Michael's eyes. Why are you doing this? He pleaded. After everything, why even bother? Daniel paused, and for the first time a flicker of something personal entered his voice. A few weeks ago, my mother was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Institute of Architects. She stood on a stage and she spoke about the importance of building things that last, about creating foundations that can withstand any storm. She never mentioned you, but her entire life is a testament to what she meant. He stood up, his presence filling the room. I'm not doing this for revenge, Michael. Revenge is an emotional investment, and frankly, you're not worth the capital. I'm doing this because it's a good business deal, and because my mother taught me that when you have the power to build something better from the wreckage, you do it. He pushed his chair in. You have until 5 o'clock to accept the offer. My lawyer will handle the details. Without another look at the broken man sitting at the table, Daniel turned and walked out of the room. That evening, Daniel met his mother for dinner at her favorite restaurant. The news was already breaking online. Tech billionaire Daniel Hartwell acquires Sterling Coal real estate division in major power play. Jessica looked across the table at her son, her heart filled with a quiet, profound pride. She saw the little boy with the sketchbook, the tired student coding in his dorm room, and the powerful, principled man he had become. Was it difficult? She asked softly. Daniel took a sip of water, considering his answer. No, he said finally. It was just an accounting, a balancing of the books. They raised their glasses not to victory or revenge, but to a foundation that had proven unshakable, and to a future they had built together, brick by brick. Of course, here is part 8. A decade passed, turning the sharp edges of memory into the smooth stone of history. The acquisition of the Sterling Coal REIT was no longer a dramatic corporate maneuver, but a footnote in the much larger story of Arch Link, which had grown into a global behemoth, reshaping city skylines and fundamentally altering the way humanity built its spaces. Daniel Hartwell, now in his early 40s, was a husband and a father. He had married a brilliant environmental lawyer named Maya, a woman whose passion for justice mirrored his own drive for innovation. They had a daughter, a bright, curious 7-year-old named Sophie. Watching Sophie grow, Daniel finally understood the depth of his mother's sacrifice in a way his younger self never could. He saw how every decision, every late night, every worry had been for him. His own life, filled with a warmth and stability he never took for granted, was the final finished structure built upon the foundation she had laid. He ran his empire not from a throne of arrogance, but from a desk cluttered with his daughter's drawings and models of sustainable urban renewal projects. The Hartwell Foundation had become his true passion, pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into creating beautiful, affordable housing that gave families the one thing his mother had fought so hard for: a place to call home with dignity. He was unimaginably wealthy, yet his greatest pride was seeing his mother, now in her 70s, cutting the ribbon on a new community center, her face radiant with purpose. Jessica Hartwell had finally gracefully retired. She'd handed the reins of Hartwell Designs to a talented young partner she had mentored for years. Her days were no longer filled with blueprints and contractors, but with finger painting sessions with Sophie and long walks in the garden of the home she had built. The peace she exuded was absolute. She had won not by defeating Michael, but by building a life so full of love and meaning that his memory had simply faded, like a faint, irrelevant pencil mark that had been erased from the page. One afternoon, an unexpected email landed in Daniel's inbox. The sender was Paisley Graham. He hadn't heard from or about his half-sisters since their mother had taken them to Florida. The email was short and humbled. Paisley explained that after years of drifting, she had become a nurse. The entitlement her parents had bred into her had been a poor shield against the harsh realities of a life without endless funds. She wrote that she was now working at a hospice and had recently cared for a patient who had spent his final days talking about his life's biggest regret, not knowing the son he had. The patient was Michael Graham. He had died 2 weeks prior from a sudden illness alone in a small state-funded nursing facility. His death had gone unnoticed by the world. Paisley wasn't asking for money. She was asking timidly if Daniel might one day be willing to meet so she could simply know a part of the family she had lost. Daniel read the email, a complex wave of emotions passing over him. There was no grief for the man he never knew, but a quiet sorrow for a life so poorly spent. He thought of his own daughter, Sophie, and the fierce, unconditional love he felt for her. How could a father walk away? It was a question he would never understand. He wrote back a simple, kind reply, agreeing to a coffee when she was next in town. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about closing a final door, about choosing a small act of grace where his father had chosen cruelty. Later that evening, he found his mother on her porch watching the sunset paint the sky in strokes of orange and gold. He told her about Michael's death and Paisley's email. She listened silently, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "He wasted it," she said, her voice soft but clear. "He had all the money, all the power, a chance at a beautiful family. And he wasted it all. What a sad, empty blueprint for a life." Daniel sat beside her, and together they watched the last light of the day fade. There was no sense of victory, no lingering bitterness. There was only a profound sense of peace. The ledgers were balanced, the accounts were closed. The story finally was complete. The house they had built together, a house of love, resilience, and integrity, stood strong and would stand for generations to come. That was the only fortune that ever truly mattered. And so the story of Michael Graham doesn't end with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet, irreversible irrelevance. He accepted the offer because he had no choice living out his days in obscurity, a ghost haunted by the empire he lost, and the son he never knew. Jessica Hartwell, the woman he tried to erase, continued to thrive. Her name etched onto award-winning buildings, her legacy secured not just in steel and glass, but in the character of the son she raised. Daniel's success wasn't just a victory. It was the ultimate karma. He didn't just become richer than his father. He became a better man, proving that what you build with integrity, heart, and resilience is the only fortune that can never be taken away. What do you think? Was Daniel's final move an act of cold justice or a missed opportunity for forgiveness? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of betrayal and ultimate triumph resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of karma and justice. Thank you for listening.